before the Mexican-American War could redraw half a continent, before United States troops crossed disputed ground near the Rio Grande, before Mexico City fell to an invading army, there was Texas. But Texas in the 1820s was not yet the symbol later generations would imagine. It was not simply American, not simply Mexican, not only a frontier of cabins and cattle, and not only a stage waiting for Sam Houston. It was a borderland, huge, thinly governed, culturally mixed, dangerous, ambitious, and deeply uncertain. To the north and east lay the expanding United States, a republic hungry for land, trade, cotton, ports, rivers, and influence. To the south lay Mexico, newly independent from Spain, still trying to decide what kind of nation it would become. Between them stretched a world of prairies, forests, missions, ranches, rivers, indigenous homelands, old Spanish claims, Tejano settlements, and new arrivals who saw opportunity in land that governments struggled to control. Texas had long been part of the Spanish imperial frontier. Spain had planted missions and presidios, but the province remained underpopulated compared with central Mexico. San Antonio de Bexar was the political and cultural heart of Mexican Texas. But beyond its roads and ranches, authority thinned quickly. East Texas connected naturally to Louisiana and the American South. The Gulf connected Texas to trade. The interior belonged not simply to any capital, but to distance, horsemen, raiders, traders, and people who understood that paper claims meant little without food, alliances, and armed men. When Mexico won independence in 1821, it inherited this problem. The new nation claimed Texas, but claiming land was easier than governing it. Mexico needed settlers who would farm, defend, trade, and make the province harder for foreign powers to absorb. That need opened the door to one of the most consequential experiments in North American history: the impresario system. The idea seemed practical. Approved agents could bring families into Texas, distribute land under Mexican law, and help build stable communities. Settlers would become Mexican citizens, follow Mexican law, and strengthen the frontier. In theory, it was a bargain: land and opportunity in exchange for loyalty and development. In practice, it would become something far more explosive. The man most closely tied to that bargain was Stephen F. Austin. He was not the first dreamer to look toward Texas, but he became the most important. His father, Moses Austin, had secured permission to bring settlers into Spanish Texas, but died before the project could fully take shape. Stephen inherited the plan at the very moment Spain's empire gave way to independent Mexico. Austin's challenge was enormous. He had to persuade Mexican authorities that his colonists would be useful, orderly, and loyal. He had to persuade settlers that Texas was worth the risk. He had to build communities where law, land titles, farming, credit, language, and defense all had to be worked out under pressure. To many families from the United States, Texas looked like a chance to start over. Land was cheaper and more abundant than in older southern states. Cotton could grow. Rivers promised access. Families who felt crowded, indebted, or ambitious could imagine a future on Mexican soil. But the very success of that migration carried danger. Every new settler made Texas stronger, and every new settler also made Mexico wonder whether its frontier was being secured or quietly transformed. Stephen F. Austin understood that Texas could not survive on romance alone. He was a careful organizer, a negotiator, a translator between worlds, and often a frustrated disciplinarian. He needed settlers, but not chaos. He needed growth, but not open defiance. He needed to satisfy people who had crossed into Texas for opportunity, while reassuring Mexican officials that those people would not become a foreign colony in disguise. Austin's first major group of settlers became famous as the Old 300. They received land grants and began building farms and settlements along the Brazos and Colorado rivers. Their world was not easy. Cabins had to be raised, fields had to be cleared, crops failed, floods came, disease traveled quickly, credit was scarce, tools mattered, salt mattered, mills mattered. A lost horse could mean hunger. A misunderstanding over land could become a feud. The settlers also entered a place already inhabited and contested. Tejanos had deep roots in Texas. Indigenous nations, especially Comanche power in the plains, shaped the practical limits of settlement. Mexican officials had their own priorities. Traders, speculators, smugglers, and adventurers moved through the region. Nothing in Texas was simple. Austin tried to keep order by making himself indispensable. He mediated land disputes, communicated with Mexican officials, urged settlers to obey the law, and warned against behavior that would confirm Mexican fears. At times, he sounded less like a revolutionary than a man desperately trying to prevent revolution. He knew that the colony's future depended on trust. Mexico's Constitution of 1824 created a federal republic. For many Texans, that mattered deeply. Federalism meant power divided between the national government and the states. Texas was joined with Coahuila as the state of Coahuila y Texas. Many colonists hoped local rights would be protected through that federal structure. Tejanos and Anglo settlers could disagree about many things, but many shared fear of distant central authority. Still, tensions were visible from the beginning. Many Anglo settlers spoke English, practiced Protestant forms of worship despite Catholic expectations, and carried customs from the American South. Most explosive of all was slavery. Mexico moved against slavery in ways that collided directly with the cotton ambitions of many settlers from the southern United States. Legal workarounds and exemptions delayed the confrontation, but they did not erase it. The issue remained a moral, economic, and political fault line beneath the colony. Immigration also became a crisis. As more people entered Texas from the United States, Mexican leaders began asking a hard question. Was settlement strengthening Mexico or preparing the ground for annexation by the United States? That fear was not imaginary. American interest in Texas had existed for years. Some Americans believed Texas should have been included in the Louisiana Purchase. Others saw it as the natural next step of expansion. Land speculators watched closely. Politicians watched carefully. Mexico had invited settlers to stabilize a frontier, but it had also invited the ambitions of a neighboring republic. Austin remained loyal to his project. He believed Texas could flourish within Mexico if the government respected local needs. But with every year, the balance grew harder to hold. To understand why Texas moved toward revolt, we have to look beyond Texas. Mexico itself was struggling to become stable after independence. The country had inherited the wreckage of colonial rule, regional divisions, financial strain, military ambition, church influence, competing visions of government, and a vast territory difficult to administer. The question at the center of Mexican politics was not small. Would Mexico be a federal republic where states held meaningful power, or a more centralized nation where authority flowed from the capital? Federalists feared tyranny from the center. Centralists feared fragmentation and disorder. Both sides believed the survival of the nation was at stake. Texas sat inside that argument like dry grass near a lantern. Its population was distant from Mexico City, culturally mixed, and increasingly tied to the United States. To centralists, that made it dangerous. To federalists in Texas and Coahuila, it made local self-government essential. A strong local voice, they argued, was the only way to keep the frontier loyal. Mexican officials faced a dilemma. Texas needed population and defense, but immigration from the United States was changing its character. The law of April 6, 1830, tried to slow that process. It restricted further immigration from the United States, encouraged settlement by Mexican and European families, and aimed to strengthen customs enforcement and military presence. To many Anglo-Texans, the law felt like betrayal. They had entered under one set of expectations and now saw the door closing behind them. To Mexican leaders, the law was a defensive measure. The United States was not a harmless neighbor. It was expanding, negotiating, buying land when it could, and pushing settlers westward even when diplomats moved more slowly than wagons. Customs enforcement became another source of anger. Settlers who had grown used to loose frontier conditions resented duties, inspections, and officials. Ports and trade routes became political flashpoints. Men who might accept Mexican sovereignty in speeches could resist Mexican enforcement when it touched their pockets. There were also cultural grievances. Language barriers mattered. Distance from the state capital mattered. Access to courts mattered. Local defense mattered. Texans complained that they needed better legal systems, better protection, and separate statehood from Coahuila. Many argued that Texas was too different and too distant to be governed effectively as part of the same state. None of this meant rebellion was inevitable. Many Texans still wanted reform inside Mexico. Many Tejanos opposed centralism while remaining committed to Mexican federalism. Austin himself tried to work through petitions and negotiation. But the political ground was shifting. More settlers arrived. Mexican suspicion hardened. Local activists organized. Newspapers and meetings sharpened grievances into arguments. Arguments became demands. Texas was becoming a place where loyalty depended on which Mexico people believed in. The Federal Republic promised in 1824, or the centralizing power rising behind military leaders in the 1830s. In 1832 and 1833, Texans gathered in conventions to debate their future. The demands were not all revolutionary. They wanted repeal or modification of the immigration restrictions, better local government, tariff relief, protection, and separate statehood for Texas within Mexico. Stephen F. Austin carried those hopes to Mexico City. His mission was delicate. He was not going as a general or a rebel chief. He went as a political representative, a man trying to persuade the Mexican government that compromise could preserve loyalty. Mexico City was a world away from the Texas settlements. In Texas, authority often felt improvised. In the capital, politics moved through ministries, factions, military pressure, and national crisis. Austin waited. He petitioned. He argued that Texas needed practical reforms. He tried to show that ignoring Texas would be more dangerous than accommodating it. Some of his requests gained traction, but delay wore him down. Frustrated, Austin wrote a letter suggesting that Texans should organize a state government if their petition failed. That letter would become a trap. Mexican authorities saw it as evidence of disloyalty. Austin was arrested and imprisoned. For months, the man who had spent years restraining his colonists became a prisoner of the government he had tried to serve. The effect on Austin was profound. He did not instantly become a reckless revolutionary, but his faith in patient negotiation was damaged. When he eventually returned to Texas, he returned to a different political atmosphere. People who had once trusted his moderation now saw his imprisonment as proof that even loyalty could be punished. While Austin waited in Mexico, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna rose at the center of Mexican politics. Santa Anna was brilliant, theatrical, opportunistic, and difficult to reduce to one label. At times, he presented himself as a federalist. At other times, he became the champion of central authority. He had the instincts of a soldier politician who understood that power often belonged to the man who could move fastest when institutions faltered. For Texans, Santa Anna's shift mattered more than his speeches. As he moved towards centralism, the federalist hopes many Texans had attached to the Constitution of 1824 seemed to be collapsing. In several Mexican states, resistance to central authority emerged. Texas was not the only place where Santa Anna's centralization caused alarm, but Texas was uniquely dangerous because its population included so many settlers from the United States and because the United States was watching. By 1835, Austin's position had changed. The man once known as the Great Mediator began warning that war might be unavoidable. That transformation carried enormous symbolic power. If even Austin could no longer believe reform was enough, then ordinary settlers could tell themselves that resistance was not impatience. It was survival. The story of Texas before revolt cannot be told as a simple line between Americans and Mexicans. That version is too clean, and history was not clean. Tejanos stood at the center of the crisis. Families in San Antonio, Goliad, Nacogdoches, and other communities had lived under Spanish and then Mexican rule. They had their own politics, rivalries, loyalties, and grievances. Some Tejanos supported federalism and opposed Santa Anna's centralization. Some cooperated with Anglo settlers. Some later joined the Texas cause. Others remained loyal to Mexico or feared what Anglo dominance would mean for their land, rights, language, and future. Men like Juan Seguin show the complexity. Seguin supported resistance to Santa Anna and became an important figure in the Texas Revolution. But his later life also reveals the painful aftermath. Tejano participation in the revolt did not guarantee equal acceptance in the republic that followed. The borderland could use people in moments of crisis and then turn against them when power shifted. Anglo settlers were divided too. Some were committed rebels, some wanted reform, some wanted land and stability more than ideology. Some had come to Texas for cotton and profit. Some came for a new start. Some distrusted Mexico from the beginning. Others had taken oaths of loyalty and meant them, at least while they believed Mexico would protect local rights. There were also enslaved people whose forced labor underwrote much of the cotton frontier. Any story of Texas settlement that ignores slavery misses one of the central engines of conflict. Mexico's anti-slavery direction threatened the plans of many slaveholding settlers. Those settlers often spoke in the language of liberty while defending a system that denied liberty to others. That contradiction would haunt Texas and later the United States. Indigenous nations were not background scenery. Comanche power shaped settlement, trade, fear, diplomacy, and violence. The ability of any government to control Texas depended partly on whether it could negotiate with or fight indigenous peoples who had their own strategies and claims. For many settlers, the frontier was dangerous because government seemed too weak. For indigenous communities, settlement meant pressure, disease, violence, and loss. By the mid-1830s, Texas was a region of overlapping anxieties. Mexican centralists feared foreign takeover. Federalists feared dictatorship. Anglo settlers feared losing local autonomy and property. Tejanos feared both central oppression and Anglo domination. Enslaved people lived under the threat of families sold, labor exploited, and freedom denied. Indigenous nations faced accelerating invasion of their homelands. That is why the coming revolt was never only about a cannon at Gonzales. The cannon mattered because it gave people a symbol, but the pressure had been building for years in law offices, land offices, ranches, cotton fields, prison cells, customs houses, taverns, town meetings, and presidios. In 1835, politics in Texas became increasingly armed. Committees formed. Local meetings debated whether to resist Mexican troops. Militia companies organized. Rumors moved faster than official orders. Every arrival from the interior brought new reports about Santa Anna, centralist authority, and the fate of federalism elsewhere in Mexico. Mexican commanders understood that loose talk could become rebellion. They needed to secure weapons, restore obedience, and remind Texas that national authority was not optional. Texans, meanwhile, understood that surrendering weapons could mean surrendering leverage. The frontier had always been armed for hunting, defense, and survival. Now those weapons became political. San Antonio de Bexar mattered because it was the old center of power in Texas. Whoever controlled Bexar controlled a symbol and a strategic position. Mexican forces there could pressure settlements. Texan volunteers could not ignore it. The roads between towns, ranches, rivers, and presidios began to feel like lines along which the future would move. Stephen F. Austin returned to Texas and found himself pulled toward leadership. He had spent much of his life telling settlers to be patient. Now he warned that the time had come to prepare. His words carried weight precisely because he was not known as a hothead. If Austin said danger was real, people listened. The language of the old Constitution of 1824 became a rallying point. Many Texans claimed they were not fighting Mexico itself, but Santa Anna's centralism. That distinction mattered. It allowed Tejanos and Anglo settlers to frame resistance as defense of Mexican federalism rather than immediate separation. It also gave uncertain people a bridge from loyalty to rebellion. But events have a way of outrunning slogans. Once men gather with rifles, once couriers ride through the night, once officials fear they will lose control, moderation becomes harder to maintain. Every side begins to interpret caution as weakness and preparation as threat. At Gonzales, a small cannon became the immediate test. The cannon had been provided earlier for defense against raids. Mexican authorities now wanted it returned. To them, recovering it was an assertion of order. To local settlers, giving it up felt like accepting that the government no longer trusted them, and perhaps no longer meant to respect their rights. The confrontation did not begin as a grand battle. It began with delay, negotiation, local defiance, and the gathering of armed men. But symbols do not need to be large to become powerful. A small cannon could stand for every grievance that had accumulated since the first land grants. A demand for return could sound like the opening move of coercion. A refusal could become a declaration without yet using the word independence. The Texas Revolution was not the Mexican-American War. It happened a decade earlier. But without it, the later war is impossible to understand. When Texas declared independence in 1836 and defeated Santa Anna at San Jacinto, it did not create a settled peace. Mexico did not recognize Texas independence as legitimate. The Republic of Texas existed in a dangerous middle space, independent in practice, rejected by Mexico, coveted by many Americans, and burdened by debt, diplomacy, frontier conflict, and internal divisions. The United States watched carefully. Some Americans celebrated Texas as a sister republic born from liberty. Others saw it as a slaveholding expansion project that would inflame sectional conflict. Presidents hesitated because annexing Texas could mean war with Mexico and a political explosion at home. But the idea did not disappear. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas. Mexico saw that act as an assault on its sovereignty. Then came the border question. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its boundary. Mexico regarded the Nueces River as the traditional limit of Texas. The land between those rivers became the space where claims, maps, patrols, and ambitions collided. President James K. Polk entered office determined to expand the United States to the Pacific. California mattered, New Mexico mattered, Texas mattered. Diplomacy failed, troops moved. When fighting broke out in the disputed zone in 1846, Polk declared that American blood had been shed on American soil. Critics answered that the soil itself was disputed. That argument began long before 1846. It began when Mexico invited settlers into Texas to strengthen a frontier. It deepened when those settlers became numerous, wealthy, armed, and politically restless. It hardened when Mexico centralized power and Texans rebelled. It became unavoidable when the United States annexed a republic Mexico still claimed. So this series begins here, before the formal war, because the war was not born in a single skirmish near the Rio Grande. It grew from settlement, law, slavery, federalism, nationalism, expansion, and mistrust. It grew from the hopes of Stephen F. Austin and the fears of Mexican officials. It grew from Tejano towns and Anglo colonies, from Mexico City's instability and Washington's ambition. The next episode will begin with a challenge at Gonzales, a cannon, a flag, and a dare. Soon after would come San Antonio, the Alamo, Goliad, Panic, Retreat, and Sam Houston's desperate gamble at San Jacinto. But before the storm broke, Texas had already become the place where two republics, many peoples, and competing futures were moving toward collision. In the autumn of 1835, the crisis in Texas became visible through one small cannon. It was not a great weapon by the standards of empires. It was not the kind of artillery that could break a fortress or decide a campaign by itself. It had been given to the people of Gonzales years earlier for protection on a dangerous frontier. But by October 1835, the cannon had become something larger than iron. It had become a question. Would the people of Texas surrender their weapons to a government they no longer trusted? Or would they resist, even before anyone could agree what resistance truly meant? Mexican authorities wanted the cannon returned. From their point of view, the request was reasonable. Texas was becoming unstable. Settlers held meetings, formed committees, raised militia companies, and spoke openly against centralist rule. A government that could not recover its own artillery from a frontier settlement did not look like a government in command. But to the people of Gonzales, the request sounded different. It sounded like the first step toward disarming them. It sounded like proof that Santa Anna's centralist government saw them not as citizens with grievances, but as rebels to be subdued. When Mexican dragoons approached Gonzales, local residents delayed them. The ferry across the Guadalupe River disappeared. Negotiations stretched, couriers rode out. Men came in from nearby settlements, carrying rifles, powder horns, and the nervous energy of a population that had been arguing for years and was now close to action. The rebels eventually raised a flag with the famous challenge, "Come and take it." The words were simple, but the meaning was layered. They were defying a military order. They were defending local autonomy. They were claiming that the old federalist promise of Mexico's Constitution of 1824 had been betrayed by Santa Anna's centralism. On October 2, 1835, the confrontation at Gonzales turned into a brief skirmish. The casualties were limited, but the consequence was enormous. The Mexican troops withdrew, the Texians celebrated. Across the settlements, the news spread faster than calm judgment could follow. The Texas Revolution had begun. At first, many insurgents did not say they were fighting for independence. That is one of the most important details in the story. A large number claimed they were defending Mexican federalism against Santa Anna's dictatorship. Tejano Federalists could support that cause. Anglo settlers who had sworn loyalty to Mexico could support that cause. Men who were not yet ready to declare separation could still take up arms under the banner of 1824. But war has a way of simplifying political language. Once shots are fired, every camp begins to sort people into friends and enemies. Mexican commanders saw armed resistance. Texian volunteers saw proof that force could work. Moderates still hoped for reform, but the ground beneath them had shifted. Stephen F. Austin, once the great mediator, now accepted command of Texian forces gathering to move against San Antonio de Bexar. Gonzales had answered one question, but raised a much larger one. If resistance had begun, where would it stop? San Antonio de Bexar was the old political and military center of Texas. It held missions, plazas, roads, storehouses, and symbolic authority. To take Bexar would be to tell Mexico that the revolt was not a local disturbance around Gonzales. To hold Bexar would be to control the heart of Mexican Texas. But the Texian army moving toward Bexar was not a professional force. It was a gathering of volunteers, farmers, hunters, recent immigrants, Tejano allies, ambitious men, suspicious men, idealists, adventurers, and local leaders. They brought courage, but not always discipline. They elected officers, debated orders, came and went according to personal obligations, and often distrusted anything that sounded too much like regular army authority. Austin had to lead men who were not naturally inclined to be led. His task was not merely military, it was political, emotional, and practical. He had to keep the force together long enough to matter. Inside Bexar, General Martin Perfecto de Cos, Santa Anna's brother-in-law, commanded Mexican forces. Cos represented the centralist authority that many Texans feared. He had troops, a defensive position, and the prestige of national power. But he also faced a hostile countryside, stretched supply lines, and an enemy that did not need to defeat all of Mexico at once. The Texians only needed to make Mexican control of Texas look fragile. As the siege developed, the countryside around Bexar became a world of patrols, scouting, rumors, and sudden clashes. The Mission Conception fight in late October showed that Texian volunteers could stand under fire. Men like James Bowie gained reputations in these actions. Bowie was already a legend in frontier circles, a man whose name carried violence, confidence, and myth. In Texas, myth could travel almost as quickly as fact. The siege dragged on. Weather, boredom, shortages, and uncertainty wore on the volunteers. Austin left for the United States as a commissioner, seeking support for the Texas cause. Command shifted. The movement still had not fully decided whether it was Federalist rebellion, independence movement, or something in between. Then, in December 1835, Ben Milam helped push the Texians toward assault. Milam's call asked who would go with him into San Antonio. Enough men answered. Street by street, house by house, they fought their way through Bexar. It was close, dangerous combat, far removed from the open symbolism of Gonzales. After days of fighting, Cos surrendered. Mexican troops withdrew south. Texians had captured San Antonio. The victory seemed stunning. A volunteer army had driven centralist forces from the most important town in Texas. Many believed the campaign was essentially over. Some men went home. Some leaders began to think about political organization. Others looked toward the Alamo, the old mission compound near Bexar, as a place to garrison and defend. But victories can create dangerous illusions. The capture of Bexar did not mean Mexico had abandoned Texas. It meant Santa Anna had been challenged in a way he could not ignore. In Mexico, the rebellion was not seen as a heroic stand for liberty. It was seen as insurrection, foreign influence, and a threat to national sovereignty. Santa Anna would not answer it with petitions. He would answer it with an army. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna understood theater, speed, and punishment. He had risen through the unstable politics of Mexico by sensing where power was moving and placing himself at the center of it. By 1835 and 1836, he had become the face of centralism, determined to break resistance not only in Texas, but wherever Federalist challenges threatened the authority of the national government. The rebellion in Texas offended him politically and personally. It challenged Mexican sovereignty. It involved settlers from the United States. It threatened to pull a vast northern province away from the Republic. If Texas succeeded, what would stop other regions from defying Mexico City? What would stop the United States from absorbing more territory? Santa Anna chose a winter campaign, a decision that stunned many observers. Moving north across harsh distances was difficult even in good weather. His army had to cross deserts, rivers, cold plains, and long supply routes. Soldiers marched with limited food, worn clothing, and the burden of a campaign meant not merely to defeat rebels, but to make an example. The Texians badly misread the danger. After the victory at Bexar, the revolutionary cause was divided. Some wanted to invade Matamoros, imagining that the war could be carried deeper into Mexico and perhaps gain support among Mexican Federalists. Others wanted to defend Texas itself. Political leaders argued. Military commanders disagreed. Volunteers drifted between projects. The consultation and provisional government struggled to create authority in a place where authority had always been thin. At the Alamo, a small garrison remained. The mission compound was not a modern fortress. Its walls were old, broad in some places, weak in others, and difficult to defend with too few men. But it stood at San Antonio, and San Antonio stood on the road into Texas. To abandon it felt like surrendering everything won in December. James Bowie arrived. William Barrett Travis arrived. David Crockett arrived with Tennessee volunteers, already carrying the glow of national celebrity. Each man brought a different kind of reputation. Bowie had frontier fame and local connections. Travis had ambition, discipline, and a fierce sense of duty. Crockett had political fame, humor, and a story larger than the man himself. Their presence made the Alamo more than a military post. It became a gathering point for personalities, expectations, and fatal decisions. Bowie and Travis shared command uneasily. The garrison needed reinforcements, supplies, and clarity. Instead, it received uncertainty. Sam Houston, appointed commander of the Texian army, had little patience for trying to defend exposed positions without sufficient men. He understood that a small force could be destroyed if it tried to hold every symbol. But Houston did not yet command enough obedience to impose a clean strategy on the revolution. Santa Anna's army approached faster than many expected. In February 1836, Mexican troops reached San Antonio. The defenders withdrew into the Alamo. The siege began. The siege of the Alamo lasted 13 days, from February 23 to March 6, 1836. In later memory, those days became legend. But before they were legend, they were cold mornings, dust, fear, arguments, sickness, cannon fire, urgent letters, and men looking over walls at an army far larger than their own. Travis wrote appeals for help. His most famous letter declared that he would never surrender or retreat. It was a powerful piece of wartime rhetoric, but it was also a cry from a trapped commander who understood the math. The Alamo needed reinforcements. Without them, courage could delay the inevitable, but it could not change it. The defenders included Anglo volunteers, Tejanos, and men from different parts of the United States and beyond. They were not a single simple category. Some fought for Texas independence, some for federalism, some for land, honor, comrades, or momentum. Some may have understood the full stakes, others were swept into them. Inside the compound, Bowie fell ill. Travis shouldered more of the formal command. Crockett became one of the faces of morale, whether in exact fact or later memory. Outside, Santa Anna tightened the ring. Santa Anna raised the red flag of no quarter, signaling that those who resisted could expect no mercy. To him, this was a campaign against rebels. To the defenders, it confirmed the terrible seriousness of their stand. The siege became not only a military event, but a contest over meaning. Yet while the Alamo held attention, the revolution's political story was changing elsewhere. At Washington on the Brazos, delegates gathered. On March 2, 1836, they declared Texas independent. The timing was extraordinary. While men were trapped in the Alamo, a new republic was being announced on paper. The Declaration of Independence gave the revolution a clear political shape. The language shifted from defending Mexican federalism to separating from Mexico altogether. That shift mattered deeply. Tejano Federalists who had opposed Santa Anna now had to decide what independence meant for them. Mexican leaders saw confirmation that the rebellion was not merely reformist. The United States watched a new slaveholding republic appear on Mexico's frontier. On March 6th, before dawn, Santa Anna attacked. Mexican columns moved against the walls. The fighting was brutal and close. The defenders were overwhelmed. By morning, the Alamo had fallen. The military result was clear. Santa Anna had destroyed the garrison. But the political result was more complicated. The defenders' deaths became a rallying cry. News of the Alamo spread fear, anger, and determination. The phrase, "Remember the Alamo," would carry the dead into every campfire conversation and every march that followed. Santa Anna had won the battle, but he had also created a symbol that his enemies could use. The Alamo was not the only disaster that shaped the revolution. To the southeast, at Goliad, another Texian force under James Fannin faced its own crisis. Fannin commanded men at Presidio La Bahia, a strong position near Goliad. He received calls for aid, including desperate appeals connected to the Alamo. But decision-making was slow, communication was poor, and the strategic situation changed faster than orders could settle. Fannin hesitated, moved late, and became trapped by the advance of Mexican forces under General José de Urrea. Urrea was not Santa Anna. He was a capable commander whose campaign along the Gulf Coast was effective and relentless. He defeated scattered Texian forces and kept pressure on Fannin. The war in Texas was not only Santa Anna at the Alamo, it was a broader Mexican campaign to break the rebellion across multiple fronts. In March 1836, Fannin's men were caught in open ground at Coleto. They fought hard, forming defensive positions on the prairie, but they were surrounded, exposed, and short of options. After negotiation, they surrendered. What happened next became one of the darkest moments of the revolution. Santa Anna's orders treated captured rebels as pirates or unlawful combatants. Urrea reportedly urged clemency, but orders from higher authority prevailed. On March 27, 1836, Palm Sunday, Fannin and hundreds of prisoners were executed near Goliad. The massacre horrified Texians. Like the Alamo, Goliad transformed defeat into rage. It convinced many that surrender offered no safety. It gave Sam Houston's army another cry: remember Goliad. For Mexico, the executions were intended to enforce authority and deter rebellion. For the Texians, they became proof of tyranny. For later historians, Goliad remains a reminder that revolutions are not clean moral plays. They are fought by governments and insurgents making decisions under fear, ideology, law, revenge, and ambition. The effect on civilians was immediate and terrifying. As Santa Anna moved eastward, families fled. This became the runaway scrape. Roads filled with wagons, children, livestock, household goods, exhausted women, elderly relatives, enslaved people forced to move with owners, and men torn between protecting families and joining the army. Rain turned roads to mud. Rivers became obstacles. Panic spread. People did not know whether Houston could stop Santa Anna. They only knew that the Alamo had fallen, Goliad had ended in death, and Mexican troops were coming. The revolution had become a test, not just of soldiers, but of society. Could a new republic survive before it had truly been born? Sam Houston was one of the few men in Texas who understood that survival could matter more than immediate glory. Houston had lived a complicated life before Texas. Soldier, politician, governor, exile, adopted member of the Cherokee world, and restless figure moving along the edge of American expansion. He was dramatic, flawed, physically imposing, and politically shrewd. In 1836, he inherited a military situation that would have crushed a commander who cared more about applause than victory. After the Alamo and Goliad, many wanted Houston to fight at once. They wanted revenge. They wanted him to stand between Santa Anna and the fleeing families. They wanted proof that the Texian army was not simply running. Houston retreated. To his critics, retreat looked like cowardice. To Houston, it was strategy. His army was small, poorly trained, and emotionally volatile. Santa Anna's forces were more numerous and advancing with confidence. If Houston fought too early and lost, the revolution might end in a single afternoon. If he kept the army intact, he kept the republic alive. The retreat was miserable. Men grumbled, civilians cursed him, political leaders doubted him. Mud, hunger, exhaustion, and fear pressed on everyone. Houston drilled when he could, moved when he had to, and waited for the moment when Santa Anna might overextend himself. Santa Anna made that mistake. Confident after the Alamo and Goliad, he pushed east, splitting his forces and pursuing the fleeing Texian government and army. He believed speed and pressure could finish the rebellion, but speed can also isolate an army. By April 1836, Houston's force reached the area near the San Jacinto River and Buffalo Bayou. Santa Anna came close with a portion of his army. The two forces were now near each other on low, marshy ground, with waterways, tall grass, and trees shaping the battlefield. On April 20th, there were skirmishes. Both sides tested the other. The next day, April 21st, Houston made the decision that would define the revolution. In the afternoon, while the Mexican camp rested and did not expect a major assault, the Texians advanced. Their battle cries carried the memory of recent disasters. Remember the Alamo. Remember Goliad. The attack at San Jacinto was sudden, fierce, and devastating. In a matter of minutes, Santa Anna's army collapsed. The battle itself was short, but the killing and pursuit were severe. Houston was wounded. Mexican soldiers were captured or killed. Santa Anna fled, disguised himself, and was captured the next day. The prisoner was not merely a general. He was the president of Mexico and the commander who had marched north to crush the rebellion. In Texian hands, Santa Anna became the key to a political settlement, or at least to the appearance of one. San Jacinto won Texas independence in practice, but it did not settle the future. Under captivity, Santa Anna signed agreements that called for Mexican withdrawal and recognized, in effect, Texas independence. But Mexico's government rejected the legitimacy of agreements made by a captive president. From Mexico's perspective, Texas remained a rebellious province. From Texas's perspective, the battlefield had spoken. That unresolved contradiction would sit at the center of North American politics for the next decade. The Republic of Texas now existed, but it was fragile. It had land claims, debt, diplomatic problems, defense problems, and deep internal contradictions. Tejanos who had supported the revolution often found themselves marginalized in the new order. Indigenous nations faced continued pressure from settlement and military campaigns. Enslaved people saw the new republic protect and expand the system that Mexico had threatened. The language of liberty had produced a slaveholding republic. Sam Houston became the hero of San Jacinto, but heroism did not erase difficulty. Texas needed recognition, money, security, and a future. Many Texans wanted annexation by the United States. Some Americans wanted Texas eagerly. Others feared that annexation would bring war with Mexico and intensify the fight over slavery inside the United States. Mexico did not forget. Raids, counter-raids, diplomatic protests, and military alarms kept the borderlands tense. The Republic of Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its southern and western boundary. Mexico treated the Nueces River as the real edge of Texas. Between those rivers lay a vast disputed space. That disputed space would become one of the immediate triggers of the Mexican-American War. This is why the Texas Revolution belongs inside the story of the Mexican-American War. Gonzales, Bexar, the Alamo, Goliad, the Runaway Scrape, and San Jacinto did not cause the 1846 war by themselves, but they created the unresolved republic that the United States would later annex. They created martyrs and myths that shaped American public imagination. They created Mexican anger that did not fade. They created a boundary dispute that politicians would later turn into a military crisis. When the United States annexed Texas in 1845, it did not annex a quiet territory. It annexed a revolution's unfinished business. In the next episode, the story moves from battlefield victory to international crisis. The Republic of Texas, annexation politics, manifest destiny, Mexico's refusal to accept the loss, James K. Polk's ambitions, and the disputed strip of land where two nations would soon send soldiers. The canon Gonzalez had asked whether Mexico could command obedience in Texas. San Jacinto answered that Texas could break away. But the larger question remained unanswered. What would happen when the United States took Texas into itself and Mexico refused to accept that the story was over? San Jacinto ended a campaign, but it did not end the crisis. In April 1836, Sam Houston's army had defeated Santa Anna and captured the Mexican president. Texas had won independence in practice. But practice and recognition are not the same thing. A new republic could raise a flag, elect leaders, send diplomats, and claim borders. Yet if the country it broke away from refused to accept the loss, the war could simply change shape. That is what happened after the Texas Revolution. The Republic of Texas entered the world with glory, debt, danger, and uncertainty. It claimed a vast territory, far larger than the settlements it could actually control. It had a heroic battlefield story, but it also had a weak treasury, frontier violence, political divisions, and a population still trying to recover from war. Mexico refused to recognize Texas independence. Mexican leaders argued that Santa Anna's agreements meant nothing because they had been signed while he was a prisoner. From Mexico City's point of view, Texas was still Mexican territory in rebellion. From Texas's point of view, San Jacinto had settled the question. Between those positions lay almost 10 years of tension. Texas wanted security. Many of its leaders wanted annexation by the United States almost immediately. Annexation promised protection, credit, trade, and a future inside a powerful republic. But for Washington, Texas was not a simple prize. It was a diplomatic fuse. If the United States annexed Texas, Mexico might see it as an act of aggression. And inside the United States, Texas raised another explosive question: slavery. The Republic of Texas protected slavery. Adding Texas to the Union would strengthen slaveholding power and inflame the sectional balance between North and South. So Texas waited. It built a republic while many of its citizens hoped the republic would not remain independent forever. Presidents in Washington hesitated. Mexico warned. Britain and France watched, sometimes imagining that an independent Texas might become a useful buffer against American expansion. Sam Houston understood the diplomatic game. At times he courted foreign recognition and hinted at closer ties with Britain. Whether he wanted a truly independent Texas or used that possibility to pressure Washington, the effect was clear. Texas could not be ignored. It sat between Mexico and the United States like a question no one could answer without risk. Mexico, in the years after San Jacinto, was not a silent, defeated power. It was a wounded nation facing internal instability, financial strain, regional conflict, and the humiliating loss of a northern province it still claimed. Mexican leaders saw Texas not as a legitimate new country, but as stolen territory encouraged by Anglo-American settlers and protected by U.S. ambition. That view mattered. It meant diplomacy could not begin from shared assumptions. Texas and the United States spoke of independence and annexation. Mexico spoke of rebellion and sovereignty. The border question made everything worse. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its southern and western boundary. That claim reached far beyond the settled core of the young republic. Mexico treated the Nueces River as the practical boundary of Texas. The wide land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande was sparsely settled, contested, and dangerous. It was not just a line on a map. It was ranch country, brush country, patrol country, a place where claims mattered because armies might eventually march to enforce them. Mexico launched raids and expeditions into Texas during the Republic years, including the occupation of San Antonio in 1842. The message was clear. Mexico had not accepted the new reality. Texans answered with outrage and their own expeditions, some disastrous. The borderlands remained unstable. For Tejano families, the period could be especially bitter. Some had supported resistance to Santa Anna and helped create the Republic. Yet after independence, many faced suspicion, dispossession, and pressure from Anglo settlers who increasingly dominated political life. The revolution had promised liberty against centralism. But the new republic did not produce equal safety for all who had fought for it. Indigenous nations also faced accelerating pressure. The Republic of Texas sought land, settlement, and security. Comanche power, raiding, diplomacy, and retaliation shaped life on the frontier. The Republic's weakness did not make it harmless. It made its leaders desperate for land and legitimacy. Every year, Texas remained unresolved. The crisis deepened. Mexico could not easily reconquer it. Texas could not feel secure alone. The United States could not stop looking west. The question became not whether Texas mattered, but who would finally act. By the early 1840s, annexation had become one of the most dangerous issues in American politics. President John Tyler, isolated from much of his own party, saw Texas as a way to shape history and rescue his political legacy. He pushed for annexation. Supporters argued that Texas belonged naturally with the United States, that Americans had settled it, that expansion was destiny, and that foreign powers might otherwise gain influence over it. Opponents saw danger everywhere. Annexation could mean war with Mexico. It could add slave territory. It could fracture the Union. It could prove that the United States was becoming an empire while still speaking the language of Republican liberty. In 1844, the politics of Texas helped transform a presidential election. James K. Polk, a Tennessee Democrat and protege of Andrew Jackson, emerged as a dark horse candidate. Polk embraced expansion. He wanted Texas. He wanted Oregon. He wanted access to the Pacific. His supporters framed expansion as national destiny, a mission to carry the United States across the continent. The phrase "manifest destiny" captured the mood of many Americans, though not all. To believers, expansion seemed inevitable, providential, and democratic. To critics, it looked like conquest wrapped in moral language. To Mexico, it looked like a direct threat. The election of 1844 signaled that the United States was moving toward action. Tyler moved quickly before leaving office. Instead of relying on a treaty which had failed in the Senate, annexation advanced through a joint resolution of Congress. Texas accepted. In 1845, the United States annexed the Republic of Texas. Mexico broke diplomatic relations. That moment is crucial. War had not yet begun, but the relationship had snapped. The United States had absorbed a republic Mexico still claimed as rebellious territory. Texas entered the Union with the boundary claim to the Rio Grande. Mexico rejected both the annexation and the boundary claim. Annexation did not solve the Texas problem. It internationalized it. James K. Polk entered the presidency in March 1845 with a clear sense of purpose. He was not a passive expansionist. He had goals, and he moved toward them with discipline. Texas was only one part of his larger map. Polk wanted Oregon settled with Britain. He wanted California and New Mexico. He believed the United States should stretch to the Pacific. The annexation of Texas gave him one crisis. His ambitions toward the West gave him another. California was especially tempting. Its ports looked toward Asia and the Pacific world. Its distance from Mexico City made it seem vulnerable. American settlers and merchants were already present. Polk hoped to acquire California and New Mexico by negotiation if possible. To that end, he sent John Slidell to Mexico in late 1845. Slidell's mission was delicate and ambitious. He was to discuss the Texas boundary, seek settlement of U.S. claims, and explore the purchase of New Mexico and California. But Mexico's government was unstable, and accepting Slidell would have looked like accepting humiliation. Mexican leaders faced public anger over Texas. To negotiate the sale of more territory after losing Texas could be political suicide. Slidell was not received. Polk interpreted that refusal as an insult and a failure of diplomacy. But Mexico saw the matter differently. From Mexico's view, the United States had annexed disputed territory and now wanted to negotiate from a position of pressure. Diplomacy conducted in the shadow of expansion did not feel neutral. While Slidell waited and failed, the military situation sharpened. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor and U.S. troops into Texas. At first, Taylor camped near Corpus Christi, close to the Nueces River. This position was provocative, but not yet the final step. The real escalation came when Polk ordered Taylor south toward the Rio Grande. If the Rio Grande was the rightful border, Taylor was moving within American territory. If the Nueces was the true boundary of Texas, Taylor was marching into disputed or Mexican territory. That difference would define the argument over the war. The land between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande was not empty in the way politicians often imagined. It contained ranches, roads, settlements, families, and loyalties shaped by generations of borderland life. But it was thinly governed, exposed, and claimed by more than one power. When Zachary Taylor's army moved south in 1846, it carried the United States claim with it. Soldiers marched through harsh country, past scrub, prairie, heat, insects, and uncertain water. Their orders turned a boundary argument into a physical presence. Across the Rio Grande stood Matamoros, a Mexican town watching the American advance with alarm. Taylor established a position opposite Matamoros and began construction of a fortification that would be known as Fort Texas. Mexican forces under General Mariano Arista and other commanders faced a direct challenge. U.S. troops were now on land. Mexico did not accept as American. Both sides could claim they were defending sovereignty. That is what made the crisis so combustible. Polk needed Mexico to negotiate or give him a cause. Mexico needed to resist without appearing weak. Taylor needed to follow orders. Mexican commanders needed to answer a foreign army on contested ground. Every rider, patrol, and report became dangerous. In April 1846, Mexican forces crossed the Rio Grande. A detachment of U.S. dragoons under Captain Seth Thornton was ambushed north of the river. Several Americans were killed, wounded, or captured. The clash became known as the Thornton Affair. For Polk, the news was exactly the kind of event that could move Congress. He declared that American blood had been shed on American soil. Critics would challenge that claim immediately. Abraham Lincoln, then a young congressman, would later demand to know the exact spot where blood had been shed. Was it truly American soil, or disputed soil made American by presidential assertion and military movement? But in May 1846, the political machinery moved quickly. Congress declared war. Many Americans rallied behind the flag. Others warned that the nation had been maneuvered into a war of conquest. The Mexican-American War had begun. From the start, the war carried two competing narratives. Polk's story was simple and powerful. Mexico had invaded American territory and attacked American soldiers. The United States was defending its rights, its border, and its honor. In a country already alive with expansionist confidence, that story could move crowds and votes. The opposing story was darker. The United States had annexed disputed Texas, sent an army into contested land, tried to buy more Mexican territory, and then used the first clash as a justification for war. To critics, the conflict looked less like defense and more like expansion by design. Both stories mattered because the war would not only be fought on battlefields. It would be fought in newspapers, sermons, campaign speeches, congressional debates, and private letters. Volunteers would march with confidence, families would read casualty lists, politicians would calculate, abolitionists would ask whether the war was meant to expand slavery. Expansionists would dream of Pacific ports. Mexico faced its own internal crisis. Political instability, regional divisions, weak finances, and military challenges made resistance difficult. Yet the war also became a defense of national honor. Mexico had lost Texas. It would not quietly surrender more land. Zachary Taylor, still in northern Mexico, would soon fight the first major battles at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. Those battles would decide whether his army could hold its position near the Rio Grande. But the deeper decision had already been made. Diplomacy had failed. Annexation had hardened into confrontation. A disputed boundary had become a battlefield. The war was no longer coming. It had arrived. Episode 3 ends at the threshold of open war, because the story now changes speed. The first two episodes followed Texas from settlement to revolution. This episode followed the unresolved aftermath into annexation and crisis. The next episode moves into combat between national armies. Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma, the siege of Fort Texas, and the rise of Zachary Taylor as a national figure. But before the cannons open across the prairie, it is worth holding the full chain in view. Mexico invited settlement into Texas to strengthen a frontier. The settlers became politically powerful, culturally distinct, and increasingly tied to the United States. Santa Anna's centralism helped push Texas into revolt. San Jacinto created a republic Mexico refused to recognize. Annexation pulled that unresolved republic into the United States. Polk's expansionist map pointed beyond Texas toward California and New Mexico. The Nueces and Rio Grande became rival claims. Taylor's march made the claim physical. Thornton's clash made it political. No single event explains the war. The war emerged from a chain of decisions, ambitions, fears, and opportunities. For Texans, annexation promised safety. For Polk, it was part of a continental vision. For Mexico, it was the theft of a province and the threat of more losses to come. For enslaved people and anti-slavery critics, expansion raised the question of whether new lands would carry bondage westward. For Tejanos and borderland families, the crisis meant armies arriving where older communities already lived. The map was about to change. The price would be paid by soldiers, civilians, and nations that could no longer step back from the line they had drawn. By the spring of 1846, the argument over Texas had become a military standoff on the Rio Grande. Zachary Taylor's army had marched south from Corpus Christi and planted itself opposite Matamoros, a Mexican town that looked across the river at American tents, artillery, and earthworks. To President James K. Polk, Taylor was standing on American soil, enforcing the Rio Grande boundary claimed by Texas. To Mexico, the American army had advanced into disputed land and now threatened Mexican territory from the riverbank itself. The position Taylor built became known as Fort Texas. It was an earthwork, not a grand stone fortress. Soldiers dug, hauled, sweated, and built under the eyes of Mexican forces across the water. The fort mattered because it made the U.S. claim permanent enough to defend. A line on a map had become shovels in the dirt, cannon in place, and men under orders. In Matamoros, Mexican commanders faced a hard choice. If they allowed Taylor to remain, they appeared to accept the American claim. If they attacked, they risked giving Polk the war crisis he wanted. General Mariano Arista eventually took command of Mexican forces in the area. He was operating under pressure from a government that could not appear weak, and against an enemy whose orders were designed to force the issue. Taylor, for his part, was not a reckless commander by temperament. He was plain-spoken, stubborn, and practical. His soldiers called him Old Rough and Ready because he seemed less polished than many officers and more comfortable in the field than in ceremony. But rough simplicity did not make his position simple. He had to keep his army supplied, protect the fort, watch Matamoros, and respond to Mexican movement without losing the initiative. When news arrived that U.S. dragoons under Captain Seth Thornton had been attacked in the disputed Strip, events accelerated. Polk would use the clash in Washington. On the ground, Taylor had a more immediate problem. Mexican forces were active, Fort Texas was exposed, and his supply base at Point Isabel near the coast had to be protected. Taylor made a fateful decision. He left a garrison inside Fort Texas and marched much of his army toward Point Isabel to secure supplies. That movement gave Arista an opportunity. Mexican forces crossed the river and placed themselves between Taylor and the fort. Fort Texas came under bombardment. The first campaign of the Mexican-American War had begun. The siege of Fort Texas was not the largest event of the war, but for the men inside, it was the whole world. Mexican artillery opened fire across the river. Shells struck earthworks, tents, and open ground. The garrison, commanded by Major Jacob Brown, endured the bombardment while Taylor was away. The fort had been built quickly, and its defenses were imperfect, but earth could absorb punishment that stone might shatter under. The men dug deeper, watched the sky, and waited. Major Brown became the human center of the siege. He was wounded during the bombardment, but continued to encourage his men before dying from his injuries. The fort would later be named Fort Brown in his honor. That name would outlast the campaign and become part of the geography of the border itself. The defenders could hear battle approaching before they knew the outcome. Taylor was marching back from Point Isabel. Arista intended to block him. The fort's survival depended on whether Taylor could break through and reconnect with the garrison. For civilians in Matamoros and along the river, the war had arrived at their doorsteps. Families heard cannon. Merchants watched soldiers move through streets. Local people understood something that distant politicians often ignored. The border was not empty. It was lived-in country, and now it was becoming a battlefield. Taylor's column moved inland from Point Isabel with wagons, supplies, artillery, and infantry. The march was hot, dusty, and tense. Somewhere ahead, Mexican forces waited. Behind him, Fort Texas was under fire. Every mile tightened the campaign. On May 8, 1846, Taylor's army approached open prairie near Palo Alto. There, Arista deployed his army across the road. Palo Alto was a battlefield of grass, heat, smoke, and distance. The terrain mattered. It was open enough for artillery, but broken by tall grass and chaparral. Mexican forces had numbers and cavalry. Taylor had a smaller army, but he had artillery that could move and fire with unusual speed. That arm would shape the day. Major Samuel Ringgold's flying artillery became one of the battle's defining features. Light guns moved forward, fired, shifted, and fired again. In an era when artillery could be slow and formal, Ringgold's batteries gave Taylor flexibility. The guns tore gaps, disrupted formations, and forced Mexican troops to endure punishment at range. Arista's army fought with courage. Mexican infantry stood under fire. Cavalry maneuvered in the grass. Officers tried to bring order across a field clouded by smoke. But the artillery imbalance was severe. Taylor's guns reached out across the prairie with a precision and tempo that Mexican forces struggled to answer. The battle did not become a dramatic bayonet collision in its early phases. It was a grinding contest of position and firepower. Smoke rolled through the grass. Cannon flashes appeared and vanished. Men lay flat. Horses screamed. Officers tried to see through haze and dust. The prairie itself caught fire in places, adding heat and confusion to the field. Ringgold was mortally wounded, turning the success of the flying artillery into a story of sacrifice. His name would be celebrated across the United States. One of the first battlefield heroes of the war, but the Mexican soldiers under his guns paid the more terrible price. By evening, Arista withdrew to a stronger defensive position at Resaca de la Palma. Palo Alto had not destroyed his army, but it had shown that Taylor's force was more dangerous than its size suggested. The next day, May 9th, Taylor advanced again. Resaca de la Palma was a very different battlefield. Instead of open prairie, the armies met in dense chaparral near a dry ravine. Visibility was limited. Units became separated. Command was harder. The fight became confused, close and violent in a way Palo Alto had not been. Mexican forces took position along the Resaca, using the terrain to blunt Taylor's advantage. Their artillery guarded the road. If they could stop the Americans there, Fort Texas might remain isolated and Taylor's campaign could falter. Taylor sent men forward through the brush. U.S. infantry pushed into tangled ground. Dragoons charged toward Mexican guns. Captain Charles May led a famous mounted attack that captured enemy artillery and seized General Romulo Diaz de la Vega. The charge became one of the iconic moments of the early war. Fast, risky, and easy for newspapers to turn into legend. But Resaca de la Palma was not won by a single charge alone. It was won through pressure, confusion, and the gradual collapse of Mexican positions under repeated American attacks. The dense terrain made the battle hard to control for both sides. Mexican soldiers fought and fell back. Officers tried to rally them. The road became a channel of fire and panic. Eventually, Arista's army broke and retreated toward the Rio Grande. Many soldiers crossed the river in disorder. Equipment, artillery, and supplies were abandoned. Taylor had won again. The victories at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma transformed the opening of the war. Fort Texas was relieved. Matamoros was exposed. Taylor's army had survived the first test and emerged with momentum. After Resaca de la Palma, Arista's position north of the Rio Grande became untenable. Mexican forces withdrew across the river and Taylor advanced toward Matamoros. The city had been the great Mexican presence across from Fort Texas. It had watched the American fort rise, watched the artillery duel, watched the road fill with soldiers and rumors. Now it faced occupation. Mexican troops evacuated. U.S. forces entered Matamoros in May 1846. For the United States, the entry into Matamoros looked like vindication. Taylor had been ordered to the Rio Grande, challenged by Mexican forces, and then victorious in battle. Newspapers celebrated. Polk's war message now had battlefield success behind it. For Mexico, the loss was bitter. The war had opened with defeat on the northern frontier. Yet Mexico was not beaten. Its army had withdrawn, not disappeared. Its government would continue the war. The geography ahead was enormous, and the United States would soon discover that winning battles near the Rio Grande was not the same as conquering Mexico. The occupation also revealed a pattern that would repeat throughout the war. American armies would move through Mexican towns where civilians had to decide how to survive occupation, trade, fear, disease, and uncertainty. Soldiers might arrive speaking of honor and national destiny. Residents experienced requisitions, suspicion, disruption, and the presence of armed strangers. Taylor now had a base for further operations into northern Mexico. But Washington wanted more than security on the Rio Grande. Polk's war aims reached toward New Mexico and California, and soon toward the heart of Mexico itself. Zachary Taylor became famous almost overnight. Before the war, he was a career soldier, known more inside the army than across the nation. After Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, he became the face of American success. Newspapers loved his plain style. Soldiers respected his calm. Politicians saw his popularity rising. The image of old rough and ready mattered because wars create public characters. Taylor's victories gave the United States a hero at the exact moment the war needed public confidence. His reputation would eventually carry him all the way to the presidency. But in 1846, that future was still hidden. For now, he was the general who had opened the road from the Rio Grande into Mexico. There was tension between Taylor and Polk. Polk wanted victory, but he also understood politics. A popular general could become a political rival. Taylor was a Whig by instinct, while Polk was a Democrat. The war was national, but the men directing and fighting it lived inside party politics. Taylor's army prepared to move deeper into northern Mexico. The next major target would be Monterrey, a fortified city surrounded by mountains. That campaign would be harder, bloodier, and more urban than the battles on the prairie. Palo Alto had tested artillery. Resaca had tested close combat. Monterrey would test street fighting, siege decisions, and the question of how harshly the United States intended to wage war. Episode 4 closes with the United States holding the Rio Grande line and preparing to move deeper into Mexico. The opening battles had done several things at once. They relieved Fort Texas. They drove Mexican forces from north of the river. They gave Polk a victory narrative. They made Taylor a national figure. They convinced many Americans that the war might be quick and glorious. But the war was only beginning. In the West, U.S. forces were moving toward New Mexico and California. At sea, American ships watched Pacific ports. In Washington, leaders considered how far victory should go. In Mexico, defeat did not erase national resistance. The first battles had opened the door, but beyond that door lay deserts, mountains, cities, politics, disease, and a much larger fight. Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma were not the whole war. They were the moment when the argument over annexation became an American military advance. They showed the power of artillery, the vulnerability of command under pressure, and the speed with which battlefield success could become political momentum. The next episode follows Taylor south to Monterrey, where the war leaves the open prairie and enters the streets. By the late summer of 1846, the Mexican-American War had already changed shape twice. First, it had been a border crisis, a clash over Texas, the Nueces River, and the Rio Grande. Then it became a battlefield war, with Zachary Taylor's army fighting at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma before occupying Matamoros. But President James K. Polk did not only want to defend Texas. His administration wanted a far larger settlement: New Mexico, California, and a new map of North America. That meant the war could not remain one general's campaign along the Rio Grande. It had to become several campaigns at once. Taylor would push south into northern Mexico. Stephen Watts Kearny would march from Fort Leavenworth toward Santa Fe and then toward California. At sea, American naval commanders would watch the Pacific coast. In California, settlers, naval officers, Mexican officials, and local Californios would be pulled into a struggle whose outcome was still uncertain. To viewers following the war from newspapers, the story could look simple. American armies advancing, Mexican positions falling, manifest destiny becoming real. On the ground, it was not simple at all. It was wagon trains, disease, mountains, deserts, politics, occupation, frightened civilians, ambitious officers, and communities forced to decide how to survive a war moving faster than reliable news. The scale also changed the moral weight of the war. A battle could be explained as a response to an attack, but occupation required a different explanation. Soldiers were no longer only meeting enemy formations. They were entering plazas, raising flags over government buildings, appointing officials, and telling local families that the authority over their lives had changed. The farther the war spread, the more it tested the difference between military success and political legitimacy. Episode 5 follows that expansion. It begins with Taylor's march to Monterrey, then follows the war westward into New Mexico and California. The theme is not one battle, it is scale. In 1846, the war stopped being a single front and became a continental contest. After Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, Taylor held the Rio Grande line. Matamoros was occupied, Fort Texas had been relieved, and American newspapers had found a new hero in Old Rough and Ready. But victory near the river did not end the war. It opened the road into Mexico. Taylor's next target was Monterrey, one of the most important cities in northern Mexico. It sat in a valley framed by the Sierra Madre, guarded by stone buildings, forts, and difficult approaches. The city was not just another dot on a campaign map. It was a political symbol, a supply center, and a gateway toward the Mexican interior. Getting there was its own campaign. Taylor's army moved through heat, mud, disease, dust, and uncertainty. Supplies had to be moved upriver and overland. Wagons broke, animals died. Volunteers learned that war was not only battle, it was waiting, marching, hunger, boredom, fear, and the constant friction of distance. Camargo became a reminder that armies move on logistics before they move on courage. Supplies piled up, transport had to be organized, and illness moved through the camps with quiet force. Taylor's men could celebrate the victories at the Rio Grande, but the advance into Mexico required patience, discipline, and an acceptance that geography might be as stubborn as any enemy. By September, Taylor's army was approaching Monterrey. Regular soldiers marched beside volunteers from Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, Kentucky, Ohio, and other states. Some still imagined glory. Others had begun to understand that Mexico would not be conquered by one dramatic charge. The volunteer regiments gave Taylor manpower, but they also gave him a command problem. Many volunteers were brave, but bravery did not make them regular soldiers. Discipline, sanitation, marching order, and obedience under fire had to be learned quickly. The army moving toward Monterrey was therefore both stronger and more complicated than the smaller force that had fought on the Rio Grande. Monterrey appeared beneath the mountains like a fortress built into the landscape. Mexican forces under General Pedro de Ampudia prepared to defend it. Ampudia needed to protect a major city, preserve morale after earlier defeats, and turn Monterrey's streets and surrounding heights into a defensive maze. The city offered advantages. Stone buildings could become strongpoints. Narrow streets could break an attack into pieces. Forts and batteries could force the Americans to pay for every approach. The defenses included positions around the city and on the commanding heights. Cerro del Obispado, the hill of the bishop's palace, watched over the western side. Other works, including Fort Tenaria and nearby batteries, guarded approaches from the east. Monterrey was not an empty battlefield. Civilians lived inside it, and now their homes, churches, plazas, and streets stood between two armies. Taylor divided his plan. General William J. Worth would move against the western approaches and the heights. Taylor would press the eastern side. If both movements succeeded, Ampudia's army could be squeezed inside the city. It was a dangerous plan because it required coordination in difficult ground. Worth had to swing around toward the west, seize key positions, and cut the Saltillo Road. Taylor's men had to fight into the eastern defenses without being swallowed by the city. Ampudia's challenge was just as complicated. Retreat could be seen as weakness. Holding too long could trap his army. Monterrey gave him walls, batteries, and mountains, but it also gave him a civilian population exposed to siege warfare. The Mexican defense had to carry national pride as well as military necessity. Defeat after defeat could damage public confidence, but reckless sacrifice could destroy forces Mexico still needed. Ampudia was defending a city, but he was also defending the idea that Mexico could still resist an invasion that had already crossed from disputed borderland into the republic's northern interior. Worth's movement around Monterrey became one of the most important pieces of the battle. His column moved toward the western side of the city, where the terrain rose into critical heights. If the Americans could capture those heights, they could threaten Monterrey from above and pressure Ampudia's line of retreat. The fighting around Federation Hill and the Bishop's Palace was hard and exposed. Mexican defenders understood the value of the ground. American troops climbed, maneuvered, and fought through difficult slopes under fire. The Bishop's Palace became the visual symbol of the Western fight. Its walls stood above the city like a prize and a warning. Capturing it required discipline, courage, and persistence. When Worth's men seized the heights, Monterrey's defense became more fragile. But success in the west did not make the eastern attack easy. On the eastern side, Taylor's men advanced into a brutal lesson. Fort Tenaria and nearby defenses poured fire into the attackers. Streets that looked passable became channels of danger. Buildings offered cover to defenders. The city broke formations apart. The first assaults were costly. American troops pushed forward with courage, but courage did not solve the problem of stone streets under fire. Monterrey punished direct movement. Soldiers learned to move through buildings instead of only along roads. They knocked through walls, fought from house to house, and used rooftops and courtyards to avoid exposed lanes. Mexican defenders fought with determination. Ampudia's men were not simply waiting to collapse. They used the city's structure, fell back from one position to another, and forced the Americans to keep paying for ground. Civilians endured the terror of battle in their own streets. For them, the war was no longer an argument about borders or strategy. It was cannon smoke near homes and soldiers at the door. The American adaptation to house-to-house fighting became one of the battle's most important lessons. Units learned to avoid the deadliest streets by breaking through walls and advancing from room to room. The tactic was practical, but it also revealed the horror of urban war. Homes became passageways, courtyards became firing positions, and private spaces became part of a military machine. For the soldiers, Monterrey compressed fear into corners and doorways. A man could not always see who was firing. Officers could lose track of companies within a few blocks. The city's churches and stone buildings gave the battlefield a strange intimacy. The fighting was close enough for individual courage to matter, but confusing enough that no one fully controlled it. By September 23rd, Ampudia's position had become dangerous. Worth held the western heights. American forces had pushed into the city from the east. Monterrey was under pressure from multiple directions, and continued fighting would bring more destruction. Ampudia asked for terms. Taylor agreed to negotiate. The agreement at Monterrey became one of the most controversial moments of Taylor's campaign. Mexican forces were allowed to evacuate with their arms, and an armistice paused operations for several weeks. To Taylor, the agreement made practical sense. His army had taken losses, his supply line was stretched, and destroying a trapped enemy inside a city was not his only option. A negotiated surrender secured Monterrey without turning the city into a ruin. Taylor also knew that victory could become fragile if it outran supplies. He was not standing in Washington with a map and a headline. He was standing in northern Mexico with tired men, wounded soldiers, exposed communications, and a conquered city that still had to be held. To President Polk and many Americans, the agreement seemed too generous. Polk wanted decisive results, not pauses. He worried that Taylor had let a beaten Mexican army escape. He also worried about Taylor himself. Old Rough and Ready was becoming more famous with every victory, and fame in wartime could become political power. That political tension mattered because Taylor was not a polished party instrument. He was a soldier whose plain style made him appealing to the public and uncomfortable for the administration. Polk wanted generals who won battles, but he did not want a general whose popularity might become independent of the White House. Monterrey therefore became a military victory with a political aftertaste. Monterrey therefore changed two things at once. It proved that American forces could take a fortified Mexican city. It also convinced Polk that the northern campaign might not be enough. If the war was to force a final peace, Washington might need another route, another army, and another commander. That idea would eventually point toward Winfield Scott and Veracruz. But while Washington thought about Mexico's heartland, the war was already moving west. Far from Taylor's camps, another American army was crossing the plains. Stephen Watts Kearny commanded the Army of the West. His orders were sweeping: occupy New Mexico, then continue toward California. The march from Fort Leavenworth was long, exposed, and psychologically strange. Soldiers moved across distance so vast that the war could feel invisible until they reached the people whose lives it would change. New Mexico was not an empty prize. It was a settled region with Mexican officials, Hispano communities, Pueblo peoples, traders, families, farms, and long-standing local politics. Santa Fe was a capital, not a blank space. Yet Kearny's advance moved with confidence because Mexican resistance in New Mexico was politically and militarily weak at that moment. The Santa Fe Trail had already connected New Mexico to American commerce, and that mattered. Traders, merchants, and local elites understood that power in the region did not come only from flags. It came from roads, markets, credit, animals, supplies, language, and trust. Kearny's army arrived as a military force, but it entered a society already shaped by years of cross-border exchange. Governor Manuel Armijo faced a difficult choice: resist and risk destruction, or withdraw and preserve what could be preserved. In August 1846, Kearny entered Santa Fe without a major battle. The American flag rose over the city, and Kearny declared U.S. authority over New Mexico. A conquest without a major battle can look easy from a distance. For the people of New Mexico, it was still a profound rupture. Allegiance, law, property, taxes, language, and power were suddenly in question. American occupation arrived not only with soldiers, but with proclamations, officials, promises, and uncertainties. Kearny promised protection of property and religion, which was politically wise. He understood that occupation would be easier if it appeared orderly and restrained. But promises did not remove fear. A new government, backed by foreign troops, had arrived almost overnight. Even if there was no large battle in Santa Fe, there was still a conquest. Kearny did not remain long. He organized a new government, left troops behind, and prepared to continue west. But as his column moved toward California, he did not fully understand how unstable California had already become. California in 1846 was a place of distance, rumor, and competing loyalties. It was a Mexican province, but one far from Mexico City. Californios held land, status, and local influence. American settlers had arrived in growing numbers. Foreign merchants and sailors moved through coastal towns. Naval commanders watched from offshore. Everyone understood that California mattered, but not everyone agreed on what future should follow. In June 1846, before formal news of war had fully clarified events on the Pacific coast, a group of American settlers in Northern California seized Sonoma and raised the Bear Flag. The Bear Flag revolt was messy, improvised, and full of local ambition. John C. Fremont, already a figure of exploration and expansion, became associated with the movement and with the wider American push in California. The revolt did not represent all Californians. Many Californios viewed the newcomers with suspicion or anger. Others tried to read the political winds and protect their families and property. Like so much of the Mexican-American War, events moved through local realities rather than clean national lines. Fremont's presence made events even more volatile. To some Americans, he was an explorer and symbol of westward expansion. To Mexican officials and many Californios, he looked like the advance edge of an American takeover. His exact intentions and the timing of his actions would be debated, but the practical result was clear. California's political balance was breaking down before regular military authority fully arrived. Then the U.S. Navy acted. Commodore John D. Sloat, commanding the Pacific Squadron, moved to seize Monterrey on the California coast in July 1846. Soon American flags flew over key ports. Robert F. Stockton arrived and took a more aggressive role. Los Angeles, San Diego, and other places became part of a fast-moving contest. From Washington's perspective, California was a strategic prize. From California's towns and ranchos, it was a lived crisis. uncertain authority, shifting flags, armed strangers, and the question of who would govern when the dust settled. The naval campaign also showed how different the Pacific War was from Taylor's campaign. There were ships, ports, proclamations, marines, sailors, settlers, and local militias. Control could appear suddenly on the coast, but inland authority was thinner. A harbor could be occupied before the surrounding society accepted the occupation. American occupation in the West did not end resistance. In New Mexico, the apparent ease of Kearny's entry hid deep resentment that would later erupt. In California, U.S. control proved uneven. Some towns changed hands with little immediate fighting, but local opposition remained powerful. Californios were not simply passive observers. Leaders such as Jose Maria Flores and Andres Pico would soon help organize resistance in Southern California. California resistance exposed a weakness in the American assumption that flags settled facts. Many local families had their own loyalties, grievances, and leaders. They knew the terrain better than the occupying forces. They could move through ranchos, towns, and passes with a confidence outsiders lacked. The struggle for California was therefore not only a naval story or a settler story. It was also a local war over authority, honor, and survival. The American war effort now had a new problem. Conquest and control were different things. Taking a capital or a port did not automatically secure the countryside. Raising a flag did not settle loyalty. Proclaiming authority did not erase local power. This mattered because Polk's war aims required more than battlefield victories. If the United States wanted territory, it had to hold territory long enough to bargain from strength. That meant garrisons, supply lines, political agreements, local collaborators, and the management of anger. The same problem existed in New Mexico. Santa Fe had fallen without a major battle, but the absence of battle was not the same as consent. American officers had to rely on local cooperation while also preparing for the possibility that cooperation could collapse. The occupation state was fragile, improvised, and dependent on the behavior of soldiers who did not always understand the communities around them. Taylor had discovered at Monterrey that even victory could create political trouble. Kearny and the naval commanders in California would discover that occupation brought its own dangers. The war was spreading, but so were its complications. By the end of 1846, the United States appeared to be winning. Taylor held Monterrey. Kearny had entered Santa Fe. American naval forces had seized important California ports. Fremont and other American actors had helped push events in Northern California toward U.S. control. On paper, the momentum looked enormous. But the war was not finished. Mexico had not accepted defeat. Northern cities could fall, western provinces could be occupied, and still the Mexican government could refuse the peace Polk wanted. The United States could win battles and still face the question that had been growing since the war began. How far would it have to go? Monterrey had shown the cost of city fighting. New Mexico had shown that occupation could arrive faster than legitimacy. California had shown that local politics could turn a distant war into a scramble of settlers, sailors, commanders, and Californios. The war's geography now forced Americans to think in multiple directions at once. Taylor's army faced the possibility of another Mexican army in the north. Kearny was moving toward a California situation that was changing by the week. Naval officers were trying to secure ports while political authority remained uncertain. Polk, watching from Washington, had to convert scattered victories into a peace settlement Mexico still refused to grant. Polk increasingly looked toward a decisive strike. The road through northern Mexico was long and politically complicated. The Gulf Coast offered another possibility: land an army at Veracruz and march toward Mexico City. That campaign would require the Army's senior general, Winfield Scott, and it would become one of the most dramatic operations in American military history. Episode 5 reaches the moment when the war is no longer confined to one front. It now stretches from Monterrey's stone streets to Santa Fe's plaza, from Sonoma's bare flag to California's harbors, and from Polk's cabinet room to the coming invasion route at Veracruz. But this final episode does not stop there. The war has widened too much to be understood in fragments. To see how it ended, we have to follow the remaining campaigns together. Santa Anna's return, Taylor's desperate stand at Buena Vista, Winfield Scott's landing at Veracruz, the march inland, the battles before Mexico City, and the treaty that redrew the map. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna returned to Mexican politics and command at a moment of national crisis. He was one of the most complicated figures in the history of the war. Charismatic, ambitious, ruthless when necessary, and able to present himself as indispensable even after earlier disasters. To many Mexicans, he represented both hope and frustration. He had lost, returned, promised recovery, and returned again. In 1846 and 1847, he would try to turn American momentum into a Mexican revival. Santa Anna understood that Taylor's Northern Army had become exposed. Polk and Washington were shifting attention toward Winfield Scott's planned expedition against Veracruz. Some of Taylor's best regular troops were reassigned to Scott. That left Taylor with a reduced force in northern Mexico, including many volunteers who had courage but uneven training. Santa Anna saw an opportunity. If he could crush Taylor, Mexico could restore morale, embarrass the United States, and perhaps force a different political conversation. The Northern Front might become the place where American confidence broke. Taylor moved south from Monterrey toward Saltillo and then to a defensive position near Buena Vista, close to the hacienda of Angostura. The ground mattered. The road passed through narrow terrain shaped by ravines and ridges. A smaller army could use the landscape to resist a larger one. Taylor's men would need every advantage the ground could give them. Santa Anna's army endured a brutal march across harsh country. Hunger, thirst, exhaustion, and desertion weakened it before the battle began. Yet it remained large and dangerous, and its approach carried psychological force. For Taylor's soldiers, the question became simple and frightening. Could a reduced American army hold against Santa Anna himself? The Battle of Buena Vista began as a test of nerve. Santa Anna demanded surrender. Taylor refused. The Mexican army attacked across difficult ground, probing the American line, pressing weak points, and trying to turn position into panic. The battlefield was broken and confusing. Ravines split the terrain, units shifted under pressure. Officers had to make decisions in smoke, dust, and uncertainty. American artillery became crucial. Batteries under officers such as Braxton Bragg fired with speed and discipline, helping hold the line when infantry wavered. Volunteer regiments fought fiercely, but some formations were tested almost beyond endurance. Men who had marched with patriotic confidence now faced the terror of a battlefield where survival depended on discipline they had only recently learned. Mexican attacks came with determination. Santa Anna's soldiers were not an abstract mass. They were men fighting for a country already invaded, struggling through exhaustion and command confusion, and trying to reverse the war's direction. At moments, the American line bent badly. The outcome was not obvious. Buena Vista could have become the defeat Polk feared. Taylor's public image grew from the battle because he seemed unshaken under pressure. The story that reached American newspapers emphasized his plain courage, his refusal to retreat, and the dramatic endurance of a smaller army against a larger force. Whether every detail of the legend was tidy or not, the political effect was real. Taylor emerged as an even larger national figure. Santa Anna eventually withdrew. The battle was costly and ambiguous in some military details, but politically it became an American victory. Taylor had survived the greatest threat to his northern army. Mexico had failed to destroy him, and yet Buena Vista did not end the war. The decisive campaign was already shifting to the Gulf Coast. Winfield Scott's campaign began with an operation unlike anything the United States had attempted on that scale. Veracruz was Mexico's major Gulf port and the gateway to the historic road inland toward Mexico City. To take it, Scott needed ships, landing craft, artillery, engineers, regular soldiers, volunteers, coordination, patience, and nerve. The landing in March 1847 brought thousands of American troops ashore near Veracruz in a carefully organized amphibious movement. The scale mattered. This was no frontier skirmish and no improvised occupation. It was a formal invasion aimed at the heart of Mexico. Scott, often vain and difficult, was also a serious professional soldier. He understood that the campaign required discipline, supply, and careful staging. A reckless landing could fail before the army even reached the walls. Veracruz was defended by fortifications, including the powerful castle of San Juan de Ulua offshore. Scott chose siege rather than immediate storm. American artillery and naval guns battered the city. The bombardment created military pressure and civilian suffering. Families inside Veracruz faced fear, destruction, and uncertainty as shells struck a city that was both fortress and home. The surrender of Veracruz gave Scott the base he needed, but it also reminded everyone that the war's final phase would be harder morally and politically. The United States was no longer simply occupying distant northern provinces. It was invading through the central route toward Mexico's capital. Scott had to move quickly because disease on the coast could destroy an army as surely as battle. Yellow fever season threatened. The road inland had to be opened before sickness trapped the expedition near the port. The next major obstacle was Santa Ana at Cerro Gordo. Santa Ana chose strong ground at Cerro Gordo, where the road inland passed through difficult terrain. The Mexican position looked formidable. Heights, ravines, and artillery could punish a frontal attack. But Scott's army included engineers and officers who studied the terrain carefully. Among them was Robert E. Lee, then a young engineer whose reconnaissance helped identify a way around the strongest Mexican position. The American plan used maneuver as much as force. Instead of simply battering the center, Scott's troops worked through difficult paths to outflank the defenses. The fighting was sharp and dangerous, but the result was decisive. Mexican positions collapsed, guns were captured, and Santa Ana barely escaped. In the confusion, even his personal carriage and possessions became trophies of war. Cerro Gordo opened the road inland. It also confirmed that Scott's campaign had a different character from Taylor's. Taylor had become the people's frontier general, plain-spoken and stubborn. Scott moved with a professional army along a classic invasion route, using engineers, siegecraft, logistics, and disciplined maneuver. For Mexico, Cerro Gordo was another blow after another rally. Santa Ana could still command political loyalty and military energy, but each defeat narrowed his room to maneuver. The road to the capital was not open in a simple sense, but the barrier had been broken. Scott entered Puebla in May 1847. There he paused. Supply lines, reinforcements, diplomacy, disease, and politics all mattered. An army could win battles and still be stranded if it could not sustain itself. For weeks, the campaign became a test of patience. When Scott resumed the advance toward Mexico City, the campaign entered a dramatic final geography. The Valley of Mexico carried enormous symbolic weight. Mexico City was not merely an administrative target. It was the capital, the political center, and a place layered with Mexican history, Spanish colonial power, and the memory of Tenochtitlan. For an American army to approach it was to bring the war into the heart of the nation. Scott faced defensive positions south and west of the city. The battles of Contreras and Churubusco came in August 1847. At Contreras, American forces used night movement and difficult ground to strike effectively. At Churubusco, Mexican defenders fought hard around convent walls and fortified positions. The fighting was intense, close, and costly. The San Patricio Battalion added another layer to the story. Composed largely of Irish and other immigrant soldiers who had deserted from the U.S. Army and fought for Mexico, they became symbols of betrayal to Americans and symbols of conscience or solidarity to some Mexicans. Their fate after capture was harsh and controversial, showing how the war strained ideas of loyalty, religion, identity, and punishment. After Churubusco, peace negotiations flickered but did not end the war. Nicholas Trist, sent by Polk to negotiate, found himself working in the shadow of battle, occupation, and political mistrust. Mexico could not easily accept the loss Polk demanded. The United States could not easily stop after paying such a cost. The campaign therefore continued toward the final defenses of Mexico City. In September 1847, the fighting reached Chapultepec. Chapultepec Castle stood on a hill, guarding approaches to the capital. It was a military objective, but it also became a symbol of national memory. Mexican cadets, later remembered as the Ninos heroes, became part of the story of sacrifice and resistance. The exact legends would grow over time, but the emotional truth was clear. The defense of Chapultepec became one of Mexico's enduring memories of the war. Scott's army attacked after preparatory bombardment. American troops climbed slopes, stormed defenses, and pushed toward the gates of Mexico City. The fighting was fierce and costly. Officers who would later become famous in the American Civil War served in this campaign. Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, George McClellan, Thomas Jackson, and many others. In Mexico, they learned lessons of maneuver, artillery, engineering, command, and war's political consequences. Once Chapultepec fell, American troops advanced toward the city gates. Mexico City could not be held much longer. Santa Anna's position became untenable. The capital fell to U.S. occupation in September 1847. The occupation of Mexico City was a stunning military achievement and a profound humiliation for Mexico. American soldiers entered the capital of a neighboring republic. Flags, patrols, orders, and occupation authorities replaced Mexican control in the heart of the country. Yet even then, victory did not answer every question. What peace would be imposed? How much territory would the United States demand? Would Mexico's government survive enough to sign a treaty? And what would conquest do to the United States itself? The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in February 1848. Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the Texas border and ceded a vast territory to the United States, California, New Mexico, and lands that would become parts of Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. In exchange, the United States paid Mexico and assumed certain claims. On paper, it was a treaty. In lived reality, it was a continental transformation. For the United States, the treaty seemed to fulfill an expansionist vision. The nation now stretched to the Pacific. Ports, mineral wealth, farmland, trade routes, and strategic depth entered American imagination. The discovery of gold in California would soon accelerate migration and make the consequences even more explosive. For Mexico, the loss was devastating. A huge portion of national territory was gone. The war left political wounds, economic strain, military humiliation, and deep questions about leadership and national survival. Mexican memory of the war would not be the same as American memory. One side often remembered victory and destiny. The other remembered invasion and loss. For people living in the ceded territories, the treaty created immediate uncertainty. Mexican citizens were promised rights, property protections, and choices about citizenship. But promises on paper did not always survive local prejudice, legal pressure, language barriers, and new power structures. Californios, Nuevo Mexicanos, indigenous nations, and many communities in the borderlands faced a future shaped by laws and migrants moving faster than justice. The war also intensified the argument over slavery. New territory forced the United States to ask whether slavery would expand westward. The Wilmot Proviso had already revealed the danger. The Compromise of 1850 would try to contain the crisis, but the Mexican Cession helped push the United States toward the sectional conflict that became the Civil War. In that sense, the Mexican-American War did not simply end in 1848. Its consequences kept moving. The treaty also created a problem of memory. In the United States, many people folded the war into a triumphal story of expansion, bravery, and continental destiny. There were critics, including Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant in later reflection, and anti-war voices who believed the conflict had been provoked for territory. But the popular memory often favored the drama of victory. Taylor at Buena Vista, Scott at Mexico City, and the flag reaching the Pacific. In Mexico, memory worked differently. The war became a wound, a warning, and a political accusation. It exposed divisions within Mexico's government, weaknesses in the army, the danger of regional disunity, and the crushing reality of a stronger neighbor. It also created stories of resistance that remained powerful. Defenders at Churubusco, soldiers at Chapultepec, civilians enduring siege and occupation, and leaders trying to save what could be saved after catastrophe. The borderlands carried both memories at once. A family in New Mexico, California, or what would become Arizona might have lived under Mexico one year and the United States the next, without ever moving from home. Land titles, courts, languages, taxes, churches, trade routes, and family networks all had to adjust to a new national order. Some people adapted and prospered. Others lost land, status, legal protection, or political voice. The war also changed the United States Army. It proved that the army could conduct long campaigns far from its bases, coordinate with the navy, use engineers effectively, and sustain an expedition from the coast to an enemy capital. But it also revealed the limits of volunteer discipline, the danger of disease, and the moral difficulty of occupation. The officers who studied those lessons would carry them into the 1850s and then into the Civil War. For indigenous nations, the result was not liberation or stability. The transfer of sovereignty often meant a new wave of American expansion, military pressure, land hunger, and broken promises. The map changed hands in diplomatic language, but many native communities had never consented to Mexican authority or American authority in the first place. The treaty settled a war between governments while leaving deeper struggles over land and sovereignty unresolved. That is why the ending of the Mexican-American War feels less like a door closing than a door opening into several harder stories. The United States gained territory, but also gained new conflicts over slavery, citizenship, race, law, and expansion. Mexico lost territory, but also entered a long effort to recover political stability and national confidence. The people of the ceded lands inherited a border that would shape identity for generations. The Mexican-American War remade North America, but it did not settle North America. It made Zachary Taylor a national hero and soon a president. It gave Winfield Scott one of the most brilliant campaigns in American military history. It trained a generation of officers who would later face each other under different flags. It expanded the United States to the Pacific and transformed California from distant province to explosive center of migration, gold, and statehood. It also exposed the violence inside expansion. The language of destiny could make conquest sound inevitable, but nothing about the war was inevitable to the people who endured it. Mexican soldiers fought, civilians suffered. Local communities negotiated survival. Indigenous nations faced new pressures from a growing United States. Former Mexican citizens in the ceded territories learned that a treaty could promise protection without guaranteeing equality. The war's legacy is therefore double. It is a story of military audacity, political ambition, and strategic success. It is also a story of invasion, occupation, displacement, and consequences that reached far beyond the battlefield. From Monterrey's streets to Buena Vista's ravines, from Veracruz's walls to Chapultepec's hill, from Santa Fe's plaza to California's harbors, the war forced an entire continent into motion. It redrew borders, created heroes, deepened wounds, and set loose arguments that would shape the next generation. This is why the Mexican-American War matters. It was not a small war on the way to bigger stories. It was one of the bigger stories, the hinge between the early republic and the continental United States, between expansion and civil conflict, between maps drawn in capitals and lives changed on the ground. And by the time the guns fell silent, the continent had become something different from what it had been when the first shots were fired near the Rio Grande. The final measure of the war is not only the land transferred or the battles won. It is the way the conflict forced every group involved to live with a new reality. American expansionists saw a dream fulfilled. Mexican families saw a national disaster. Soldiers carried memories of courage, fear, disease, boredom, and loss. Politicians inherited arguments they could not control. Borderland communities learned that flags could change faster than justice. The Mexican-American War was therefore not just the story of how one country defeated another. It was the story of how power moves across a map and then settles into homes, courts, farms, towns, ports, mines, and memories. Its ending created the American West as many later generations would imagine it, but it also created wounds and questions that never fully disappeared. That is the full arc of this series, from Texas and the Rio Grande, through the first battles, through Monterrey and the western provinces, through Buena Vista and Veracruz, all the way to Mexico City and the treaty table. A war that began with a border dispute ended by transforming the continent.